But often I say that actually I am from the future and that I came here in full knowledge of what was going to happen here in this time that is happening now, and that I knew I would come here. Um, in fact, I saw myself being born, if that makes any sense to anybody. I am pure love, and my words are exactly the same as that substance, actually, whether I speak or not. The moment you come into contact with me in whatever way that is, whether it's just hearing about me, a friend talking about me, or you see my image, you hear my words through a recording, or you attend a live event, you start to directly connect with exactly who and what you are, minus any of the distortions.
Ever since I met you, um, I started to connect with your message, and I said, "Wow, this is extraordinary. I love it, and I love the connection, and I love the sincerity, and I love the insight that I'm receiving right now." And it wasn't only something that connected to my mind, um, although my mind was fascinated, but it connected to my heart. And ever since that moment, I said, well, I'd love to talk to Jacqueline and bring her to our viewers here in Latin America and share this beautiful and powerful message with the ones that are going to be seeing us.
I function maybe on a range that is almost completely unknown for most human beings. And that is a range that is becoming possible for all human beings. So it's a bit like meeting yourself for the first time. And that's why I think so many people resonate when they come across me, because they are just having a very deep encounter with their very own beingness, which isn't normally able to be experienced through the everyday prism of experience. But often I say that actually I am from the future and that I came here in full knowledge of what was going to happen here in this time that is happening now, and that I knew I would come here. Um, in fact, I saw myself being born, if that makes any sense to anybody. And the first part of my life was very much about remaining hidden, and getting more accustomed to the ways that things work here. Maybe like many people, when you grow up, it all seems very strange and you have to find out the way it works. And then later, everything has come out more and more into the fore, and my life has become very public, as I knew it would. And then I'm able to show my full self increasingly, and that will only continue with the readiness and with the wish of others who come across me. More and more people want to hear and see and live from purity, and that's why I'm here, and that's what I'm about. Well, life seems like a series of decisions which we test against our internal environment and how we feel and how it sits with us. And then the external environment, the reactions of others, and again how it feels in our bodies when we actually push out into that zone around us physically and experience what the world is for us as a result of making a decision. But it's a little bit like pushing a surfboard out on the ocean. You judge the part of the wave that you want to bridge, if you like, to the point where you stand up on the board, and then you just do it. And at the moment, human beings on this planet, they go into deep series of reflections sometimes, and maybe even they restrain themselves themselves from external reality, and they pull away and go into meditation to find stillness so they can connect within, in order to make a decision. But in reality, after a certain point, the need for that disappears because you're confident that you're always standing on your surfboard, and that even if it's wobbly, that you will keep your balance. And then decision making becomes more a continual series of just small modifications to the overall journey, rather than a more profound, shall I go this way or that way? Where decision making will still exist, but it will be a very different experience. It will be a lot more free flow. It will be a lot less with, if you like, the uncomfortable aspect of mental processes. And the mental processes will, if you like, entrain with our full mind. And even the idea of mind may fall away or change completely, because we just become a receiver, an inflow and an outflow spontaneously of the universe mixed with our unique personality characteristics. And that almost becomes more like a song or a vision of physicality in action, where we still have autonomy and we still have personal sovereignty. We still answer to whatever it is that we decide to answer to, but it's a lot more integrated. It's a lot more integrated, if you like, with our purity rather than the part of us that needs to work it out. And it's also a lot more integrated with nature and all beings, that wavelength where we're already all connected.
I'd love to understand better um, what you mean by the slave self. Does it have to be, is
So,
it something like what we call the ego?
not really, because of course there's many definitions of the ego. You could probably include some of those definitions in what I mean by the slave self. Actually, when I'm talking about the slave self, I'm referring to the fact that the human being has been literally rewired into a much smaller range of functioning, and that that period is now coming to an end. Not only is it starting to undo itself, because the frequency of our times has superseded the setting where that slave self resonates, but also who or what, if you like, intervened and did that wiring, that is losing its grip on the whole of mechanics of reality. And what I'm trying to get across to people in a straightforward way as possible is that, let's just say that the human species has been distracted for a period of history into an image of itself that appears in a very, very physical and sensory based way, that leads it to mistake itself for something that always has to answer to someone else, and that is bound by a set of rules that it must either break and overcome or will inevitably have to adhere to. And the slave self actually is a whole way of being. It's a complex where whatever you do, whether you rebel against it or whether you go along with it, or whether you do nothing, you still end up obeying it and perpetuating it. And it leads to the human being always looking for a way out, or a means of escape, or something better, and to find a solution. The human being is not really even caught in that trap. And it's only when the settings of human experience begin to change because of this time in history that we start to understand that this slave self actually exists in us rather than us being trapped inside it. And now that whole experience of being trapped inside that slave self is beginning literally to dismantle. And the whole of the human species very slowly is beginning to discover that what it thought had power over it actually no longer has. And there is a gradual discovery now that all of those things are not the way that we thought they were. At the moment, our governments are making lots of rules, and then you find out that actually, when you do what you feel to do, that those rules cease to have any effect on you. Or you even come into a situation where you find the opposite of that rule being said by exactly the same government agency. And that's because all the settings are now becoming scrambled. It's not just because actually people contradict themselves, or there isn't a continuity with a lot of our systems, or, for example, even that they're corrupt. It's actually because none of the settings and dynamics of this reality actually work anymore along the lines of the slave self. And it's going to be a beautiful, maybe a messy, and at sometimes very troubled discovery process for the human being from now on, of the fact that nothing actually holds anymore except what you decide to adhere to. And it will be very empowering and life changing for all beings on this planet. Another way I like to put it is that the deal is off.
How is that shift occurring of liberating ourselves from the slave self? And how can we help for that to occur? And what's on the other end? Or what is parallel to the slave self?
Okay. There isn't really anything parallel to the slave self in direct and real time. There is a dissolution now of everything within us that doesn't match our purity setting. So it's a little bit like it is our wish to experience, not only on the outside, but on the inside, our own purity, however terrifying that is. And actually, experiencing our own purity is far more terrifying than any external threat, because first we have to go through the zone of a type of nothingness where we encounter fully our own selves and that colossal unlimitedness. That's really the drive and the power of the fear that we're encountering in the external world at the moment, still through the sphere of the slave self and all those who are still bound by it. There's actually nothing to be afraid of, and there's no fear actually in the areas that we locate it right now. It's all actually part of the mediation that we're going through in our own personal processes of integrating, and our future self actually walking into us and us assuming our full selves, our unlimited selves. So it's not so much about the how, we are actually doing it. It's the slave self that asks how, because the slave self always needs a formula, and formulas always come from other sources. Your own source connection knows how, and if there's nothing in the way, it just does it. We do it, and we enjoy it, and we want more of it. And what's happened is the slave self has begun to wear off, which other people are, through a smaller lens, interpreting as the end of the world, or the end of the banking system, or the end and the finishing of certain agencies that we don't wish to see anymore. What's actually happening is the end of our own fascination with being controlled and manipulated. And it sounds almost absurd to say that we've been sucked into that and we've quite liked the idea of it, but we really have. We have met in our own body experience the possibility of having and doing certain things which make us feel very powerful and very substantial. And we've chosen to identify with that rather than our unlimitedness, which has almost been too much for us all at once. And the fascination has completely worn off because we've come to the end of the process of seeing all of the outcomes of what happens when we move towards, if you like, that bright light. It's like being fascinated by a trinket. And just like, when we go to school or the kindergarten for the first time and we see this toy that we've never played with, you watch a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, they want it and they will push you out of the way to pick it up themselves. I can do it. And then they play with it and they work it all out and they get their delight from it, and then suddenly they drop it and they move on to something else. And so it's us changing up the gears of our own experiential reality, wanting more satisfaction, more depth, more personal sovereignty in a realm that brings us less of the negative and more of the positive. That's what's actually driving this whole experience right now. It's not an external agency or even the power of nature, because even the power of nature can be harnessed and can be accelerated by the human being. Earth herself is waking up because of human beings. It's not the other way round. You find that there's almost an abstract kind of dialogue, a sort of non personal dialogue that's crept into the world about how now nature or even the force of science or the universe will take over instead of religion or politics. It's not any of those things. It's actually the full spectrum of the human being actually being made materially possible. And then nature herself is able to wake up and go further, and we are able to encounter the full reality of ourselves through that intimacy with nature. And so you see, it's all about intimacy, not sexual intimacy or emotional intimacy. It's about the lack of separation that we already have from our own selves, from each other, from nature, and functioning purely there and nowhere else. And we've all decided that we want that filterless reality, however terrifying it might be initially, so that we don't need to experience the shadow side or the pain or the limitation anymore, or the possibility of being controlled by anything, not even our own emotions and our own fear. And this is something that all of us have in our own instructions. We brought it with us, if that's the correct thing to say, and now we're ready. That's what's driving it. So we're in control, and we always have been.